name's Clara Rose. I do legal search and recruitment, and we also try and do these events just on topics of interest to people who are working in law, to help them with their career and support them as they go along. So we've got Jono coming along today to talk all things finance and sort us out and tell us what we should or shouldn't be doing with our finances, and also sort of around mindset as well, I think, in terms of what we're earning. So over to you, Jono.
Yeah, exactly that. So brief sort of 10-15 seconds on me. So I was a lawyer. I got to about 2 years PQE before I decided, with a gentle nudge / massive kick from my wife, that I should go do something else, because I just wasn't really enjoying it. It wasn't massive oversimplification. I went into law because my dad wanted me to be a lawyer, and I like numbers, not words. So I did a little switch while on paternity leave to do a bit of a career change. But basically, I kind of understand the world, but also understand financial planning. So yeah, we spoke about it'd be useful for me to come in and have a chat about some things that people think, but also some of the preconceptions that maybe aren't quite right, or that they're focusing on the wrong things. So briefly, I was going to talk about sort of the headspace if you want to move across to a different role, or you're looking to move across to consultancy, what that sort of looks like, some of the things to think about. Then a little bit more in terms of why you might want to be focusing on things like how much you're getting paid after tax, not just headline salaries, some tax traps, things to think about, some of the benefits you might not be aware were really beneficial through various different companies and what that looks like, and then just a little bit on future planning at the end. Thought that'd be quite helpful. And then any questions are more than welcomed, either now, or if you're watching this on record, feel free to drop me a message, or Clara, depending on what you want to talk about. Always happy to answer any questions.
Absolutely. I was going to say, if you have questions, the best thing to do is to type them in the chat box, and then at the end I can read them out. It just makes it easier and saves everyone having to mess around with cameras and stuff. So yeah, any questions, pop them in the chat box and we'll get to them at the end.
Perfect. So yeah, really just to kick off on this sort of what I thought would be quite helpful is talking about what I did for moving across, because I went on paternity leave, but effectively I handed my notice in to do that career change because I needed the headspace to look at what I wanted to actually do. And I found that really scary. How do you quantify how much to have in savings? I just thought, in terms of, if you are thinking about moving and you don't know what that looks like, or you want to take some time out, I'd always encourage everyone to at least have an idea of how many months that would be. Then, a bit like building works, probably double it, because you don't want to be running out of money and taking the wrong job. But then obviously it's fundamental to that, and all planning, to be honest, is working out what your expenditure is. Like, what are you spending? What are you spending that you have to spend? Stuff like mortgage, rent, bills, versus stuff that you might want to be spending, like obviously holidays, but more discretionary, like going out to eat. And you can kind of work out what that actually feels like to you, and just put something in place. That the same applies with consultancy. If you decide to do that, obviously you're not getting paid a salary, you're generating your own work. There might be a bit of a lag in terms of when you get paid. You want to have the buffer, you want to be comfortable, you want to be not worrying about that, so that you can focus on what the day job looks like, or that sort of bigger picture of what are you trying to achieve. So I just thought it'd be useful just to, I mean, it's basic stuff sometimes, but just putting the sort of, maybe not being so optimistic, so that you know that if you've got extra, that's never a bad thing, but if you run out, that can be pretty stressful. So yeah, just a kind of a high level on that, I just wanted to touch base on. And one of the things that also to think about is, if you go self-employed, if you have your own limited company, it's a little bit of a crusade I'm on, but you're not actually technically self-employed, you're employed, but just by your own limited company. And the only reason I say that is it just impacts on some of the stuff that you can do for yourself in terms of things like pension contributions or personal insurance you can run through limited company. Just some things to be aware of in that respect as well. But I think that the main reason for kind of coming on the call and going, how to earn enough as a lawyer, we were chatting, and it was sort of, what are you looking for? Is someone just got a salary, they want to move on the job because it's going to be a drop in salary? And I know that I've spoken to colleagues who either wanted to move for a higher salary or didn't want to move because they were going to earn less, without actually delving into what that means to them. And I think that's kind of key, because what you earn is kind of irrelevant. What comes into your bank account, what's after tax, is the key bit there. And I think I was looking at this because so I'm a parent. I've got 3 boys under 4 1/4, which is incredibly stressful, obviously expensive as well. The benefits that you can get of things like the childcare tax credits, all of that, and how that feeds into what you're trying to do, is massively relevant. And the one thing that I wanted to talk about, what I'll do is I'll send the link round. But basically, if you earn £100,000, you lose access to some of those benefits. if you get childcare support for 2 children, those 33 hours, if you need to earn £146,000 to be in the same net income as if you earn just under 100 and you have that childcare. So the salaries, they are important, obviously, but they're not the be all and end all. And that's really important just to kind of get your head round, because yes, there are things you can do, like, making charity contributions or pension contributions to bring yourself under that 100, but actually that might not be appropriate for you in your circumstances. So just thinking about what am I going to get after tax is fundamental. There's other between 50 and 60,000 you lose if you're a higher rate taxpayer, right? Then you start losing child benefit. So depending on what situation you're in,
I've
a
seen
higher
those
salary.
things. I've seen
Yeah,
those sort of charts from accountants before, where they have sort of the earnings, but then they have the reality of the tax, and sort of they're very. It makes no sense, does it? There's some sections that are really punitive earnings, and some which are
yeah.
much better, and you wouldn't want to go up sometimes.
Exactly that. And I mean, within that, after the 100K, you also lose your personal allowance. So the effective tax rate is additional rate, but also you lose that 20%. So you get taxed at 60% between 100 and just over 125,000. So sometimes it really isn't as simple as you get a pay rise and you're better off, or you're much better off. So, I've seen people go down to 4 days a week to try and avoid that, because that means it's better for family life. That's why I think where you work is fundamental to what that looks like for your life. Do you earn enough? To me, is can you afford your life? Can you afford the future? But also, are you enjoying your life? Or are you just working to try and generate enough money to pay? I don't know, if you live in London, you're going to have a higher rent or higher mortgage, more expensive houses. That will then impact on what you need to earn, and therefore thinking about what that looks like for you is really important. And I did a budget when I moved out of London. We moved from central London, sort of Oval, to out into Surrey, and I had to put in things like extra trains and what that looked like, and to understand that move might look like. You can do a budget before even moving or thinking about it, or if you're in discussions, just so you understand what that looks like, rather than just I've picked a number, I want to earn 6 figures, when actually you might not need to. Your costs might reduce. You might be going and walking to work or driving like a couple of days a week, whether that's work from home, all that sort of stuff. It's now more important than it ever was to understand what you want and what that looks like from a financial perspective.
No, fantastic. And I know you've said with budgeting before, you sort of, when you try and the thought of budgeting to me just fills me with terror, because I think, oh gosh, if I think of everything I spend in a month, that's awful. But you've said before about looking over the whole year and then sort
Yeah.
of breaking it down, which feels much easier and much more simplistic, but easier then to work with.
Yeah, exactly that. Like, if you don't have a spreadsheet, and I appreciate not everyone does, yeah, just if you've got one account, get what you've spent and divide by 12, and then take off any major purchases, like you might have, I don't know, renovated the kitchen, bought a car, whatever. Then you get a rough example of what you're spending per month, and it's a decent rough and ready without having to go through all the rigmarole. But then there is quite a lot of value, and I know people don't like budgeting, but there is a lot of value in looking at what you're spending. And the example I always use, if you see me on LinkedIn, I talk about it a lot. But one of my clients was spending over 2.5 grand a month on takeaways, and she hadn't realised.
Wow.
Yeah, it's. I mean, so she's a barrister. She was caught a lot, so she didn't have a lot of time for cooking. But anyway, it was instructive, because actually knowledge is power in that respect. You can look at what you're spending on bills, mortgage. You can quantify that all quite quickly, and then you can do a rough and ready. And if you go, I think I'm spending a grand a month, £500 a month on food and going out, and then all of a sudden the numbers are telling you that over the year, after all your bills, you're spending 2 grand a month. You're going, oh, hang on a minute, why? What is that? Is that accidental, or what can I do about that?
Yeah, I guess that's the thing, is the reality. You know, you tell yourself your own stories, don't you? So in your head, like, what you're doing and what you're actually doing can be two separate things.
Yeah, and just that if you do have a budget, like a detailed budget, you might be thinking you're really accurate, but the more accurate you try and be, sometimes you miss some stuff. Because I mean, you can be accurate on your phone bill, but you can't be accurate on your food spend month to month. So just, I'd always, even if you do that, do a sense check. That, some of the apps like the Monzos of the world, they do it for you. You can literally log in and it's done. So yeah, just think about that. It's always
Yeah.
worthwhile.
No, that's good. And you said about You mentioned sort of the going from if you operate as you're self-employed and you're running a limited company, and that gives some things and takes away some things. So can you talk about that in a bit more detail? Sort of how does that change things, and what are the benefits and what are the downsides to doing that kind of arrangement?
Yeah, so at a high level, because I'm not an accountant, so you should speak to an accountant about whether
Yeah,
to set
sure.
up a limited company. But yeah, broadly speaking, there are certain things that you can do in terms of your expenses if you're self-employed, about running things through the limited company. Like you can make employer pension contributions, or you could get different types of insurance which are for the business but cover you. So there's advantages there. Obviously, you've got the limited liability aspect to it. It can be more tax efficient, particularly if you've got like a spouse or a partner that can work as part of the business or do a little bit for you. So there's advantages there in terms of what that structure looks like for you. Obviously, downsides of additional costs and admin, and sometimes it's not as tax efficient, depending on your circumstances. But it's just something to be aware of, because one of the things when you go if you go self-employed, and actually it's applicable the next bit in terms of if you are employed, what benefits do you get through work? If you go self-employed, you lose quite a lot of things. So, you know, what and this also applies if you're looking at different firms. What do they offer in terms of maternity, paternity leave? What are they? Obviously, annual leave is an obvious one. The pension contributions from employer, I have seen them matching 3% or 10%. And if they're offering you match 10%, and you're not doing that, you're actually giving away free money essentially. But if they're giving you that, that's something that is more valuable than just pure salary, maybe, depending on your circumstances, and it shouldn't be knocked. There's things that some employers give as well for personal insurance. You can get life cover. Most people get death in service through work that you don't get, obviously, when you leave. Or funnily enough, if you go to be equity partners, you become self-employed. So you often lose some of that. Firms often put in different types of group cover, but not always. So it's just something to bear in mind. So things like, you know, do they offer you, they might call it permanent health insurance or income protection if you get injured or ill? Do they offer you critical illness cover for you, for spouses, permanent health, not permanent health insurance, the other one, private medical insurance?
Yeah.
There's a lot of benefits that you might not think are that valuable, and they might not be the reason that you pick a firm over another firm, but actually these can be hundreds of pounds to replicate personally. So it's just something that you need to be aware of and factor in. And the theoretical pay rise,
Yeah.
sometimes you need to spend some of that to make sure that you're still covered, or paying an accountant, those sort of things to think about.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I think I've had some people not want to move roles because they have a very comprehensive benefits package where they are. And I've said, well, you do only need to go to an insurer to make up the bits that you're missing. You could make up and pay for yourself. And then, yes, the company wouldn't be paying for them, but you still might be overall better off just by setting it up for yourself. And then you still have that cover and you don't need to worry. But you're paying for it and you're still getting a pay rise, or you're still working in a better environment, you know. So,
Exactly that. And something that's really not very well known, but if you have cover through work, oftentimes they have this thing called continuation cover. So that you can continue that cover, you just pay for it rather than than your employer. So
oh,
it's not
okay.
like you don't necessarily have to go through the whole underwriting process again. It's something that you can actually potentially just take on, because broadly speaking, group policies don't get individuals underwritten, because if they've got a big enough mass, the insurers assume a
Mm,
certain number of people are going to get ill or whatnot, and that's factored into their algorithms. But if that applies to you, where you might have had a health condition, you can sometimes take on that cover without having to go through and apply yourself. So it's just something to be aware of as well.
yeah, that's
There are some
interesting
benefits.
because I suppose from the insurance company's point of view, they'd rather keep you as a customer
Yeah,
in any aspect than lose you altogether, sort of thing. So,
yeah, exactly that. I
yeah.
think one of the things that we've spoken about before, and like just reminiscing about my olden days when in the law, I worked for a couple of different firms as well as in-house, but the bonuses as well, and the chargeable hours and the targets. What your salary is, your target is usually a multiple of that. So actually,
Mm.
I personally subscribe to, there is more to life than just work. You need to earn enough to look after you and your family and your future and all the rest of it. But actually, if your targets are lower, you're going to have to do less work. You're going to have to bill less. It is something, well, you'll talk about that better than I will, but I think it's just worth reminding people that actually firms typically, get what they pay for, and that is your time. So it's something just to
Mm.
factor into the whole picture when they're looking at what that looks like for them, and what's the right firm or otherwise for them.
Yeah, definitely, and comes into that as well as hourly rate as well, of course, because
Yeah.
it's much easier to hit targets on certain hourly rates than, if you're on a lower hourly rate. So it's all factored in, isn't it, really, when you're looking at jobs and salaries and things.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of people that I see on LinkedIn obviously offering burnout coaching. I think that's
Mm,
also the thing to think about. Like, is it sustainable where you are? You might be earning more, but if you have to take some time out, actually, that's not going to be beneficial, not even just from a health perspective, but also financially longer term. So it's just, I think there's
mm.
more to it than what am I earning now? What's my next role going to be earning? What does that look like? I think it for me, it's a lot more nuanced than that.
Sure, sure. And what would you say then? You said about buffers. What would you say is what should you have in a pot always so that you have a buffer for, I don't know, meteor hitting the earth sort of buffer, an event
Yeah.
that's really unlikely to happen, but what should you have, would you say?
Yeah, so the things that I typically say for an emergency budget would be, your car dies, you get a leaky roof. There are some things where they're going to cost thousands, and you need to have that set aside. The general rule of thumb is 3 to 6 months expenditure in immediately available funds. That's obviously going to differ depending on whether there's two of you earning, what your expenditure is, what your fixed, what your fixed costs are, all the rest of it. But 3 to 6 is a pretty good guide. I do typically try and go to 6, and then if you're thinking of moving out and you want to take some time, that plus however long you've got. In an ideal world, I'm also a realist, but that's just something to think about in terms of, yeah, definitely, ideally.
So I suppose you were saying as well, like if you were to move firms or something like that, then if you had that 3 to 6 buffer in place, that is that you're now activating your the potential for your emergency fund kind of thing. If you need to, like you say, if it's a consultant or something like that, where you need to then build up your work to get you income.
Yeah, yeah, and what I've seen work really well is before going across, if you do go to the consultancy route of just looking at your expenditure and going, what do I actually need for the next 6 months? Because if you can reduce your expenditure for 6 months, then your runway increases because it's obviously the same amount of money just goes a lot further. There's some quite basic things you can do if you take a long, hard look at what you are spending money on. So it usually comes back to that, like, what's your number? What are you spending? What do you want to spend? What do you have to spend? But yeah,
Mm,
absolutely. That runway is critical because I mean, different consultancy firms, some of them pay you 6 weeks after you get the invoice paid. Others, same day. There's a massive variation within that anyway. So there's a lot of variables there. But fundamentally, it is going to take a while for you to sign that first client, to do the work, to then get paid on it. Obviously, depending on what area of work you're in. But yeah, the more you can have as a backstop, the better, because
mm,
it's just going to take away the stress, even if you don't end up using it. And if you need it, then great, you've got
yeah,
it.
yeah, no, absolutely, no, fair enough. And in terms of sort of stages in your career as well, uh, I myself am coming up to I'm coming up to 50. And so you start thinking that your pension doesn't look so far away. How do you sort of change things, on that scale in terms of, again, really broadly speaking, I'm talking in terms of advice that you give to people at the start of their career, sort of middle of their career, when they can actually say see their pension in sight or their retirement in sight or
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of the best time to start your pension is when you first got your first job, and the second best time is right now. So the compounding benefits, which Albert Einstein referred to the eighth wonder of the world. I always think if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. But basically broadly speaking, the earlier you start, the better. But equally, yeah, when I'm also, people come to me later in life, the closer they get, the more it's actually a priority. And there's not normally enough money for everything. I'm well aware of that. But it's just kind of looking at what you're trying to do as well, because if you're going to try and sort of stop work earlier, and I don't really like the term retirement, I call it financial independence, because retirement feels quite sort of, you have to stop work. We used to work, in a factory, and it's sort of
mm,
quite clear. Whereas now I don't think it's that clear. You can just reduce your hours. But basically, when you want to stop being reliant on your income through work, if you wanted to do that at 60 and your state pension is not going to pay out till 68, you need a very different number to when you retire at the state pension and you're getting, 10 and a half, 11 and a half, depending on what inflation is going to do, what the government carry on doing. If you've got two of you on a state pension, then, what's your number on top of that? If you want to, I had a client who raced cars when you stop working. That's obviously going to cost a lot more than if you want a nice holiday in Europe on a camper van, or sitting on the, you live near the beach and you're going to go, have your sundowners on the beach. Like, so it's different for everyone. So you need to bear that in mind. But equally, yeah, when you start to get a bit of surplus income, what you do with that is fundamental, because the sort of really easy things are, if you get a pay rise, save half of it, don't spend it all, because you will get used to a pay rise and you'll get used to your expenditure phenomenally quickly. I call it expenditure creep. It's the same thing we have as lawyers. You're aware of the scope creep and that the client's not wanting to pay your bills, but you did something different, and it's the same in your own personal life. So I haven't really answered your question massively, but I think just always have it in the back of your mind. If you've got a big pay rise, or you jump up and you don't immediately need that for everything, try and save some of it every time, because you'll thank your future you will thank you. And then also, one other final thing is, when you start at a job, any job, each job, you'll probably either not get asked, or you get asked some questions about your pension fund with the work. If they just put you in the default fund, or they put you in a low risk fund because you answer some question, you say, I don't like gambling, have a look, because that's not necessarily the best place to be for you, because that's over the long run. If you don't need access to it, the things like the volatility, which is what they're measuring with risk, it's not necessarily as applicable to you if you can't access the money. So it's not a sort of make a quick decision and then forget about it.
I guess that's the thing. It's about it changing as time goes on, isn't it? And your needs adapting as time goes on, depending
Yeah.
on whether your hobby is racing cars, or whether you're trying to just pay for childcare or whatever it is, depending on the stage you're at.
Exactly that. Broadly speaking, the younger you are, the more risk you can take, because you can't access the money in the time. You've got a long time frame for any dips that might happen to hopefully bounce back. History being our guide, they always have. So this isn't personal advice.
No, that's fair enough. I like the idea as well of having a pay rise and sort of giving yourself half of it, and then just pretending the other half isn't there, if you know what I mean. That's a good mental way
Yeah,
to deal
I
with
had
it.
a client when the mortgage was going to go up enormously, when he had a stupidly good fix and it was coming up. So what he did was, the extra amount that he knew it was going to be, he set aside every month before that
Okay,
tax rise happened. Before the tax rise, before the mortgage rise happened, and therefore he was already used to that, and he had a pot saved, which was quite handy.
fantastic. Yeah, yeah.
Quite a good way of doing it.
And I guess
Easier
it
said
could
than
go,
done, I appreciate.
yeah, yeah, it could go the other way as well. I don't know if that happens so much now, but if your mortgage is going down, I guess then mentally keep paying at the higher rate, and the increase, do something else useful with it, if you've been
Yeah.
used to writing it off already.
Exactly that. Or like, sometimes people, have nursery fees that end if they don't go down the private school route of, just trying to at least save some of that, because then you're used to dealing with that on a month to month basis. So yeah, anytime costs decrease, don't just run and take it all, and maybe go and do some fun stuff. Obviously, I want you to have a nice time as well. That's the whole enough is enough. You've got to have a good life, but yeah, you don't want to just automatically spend it without consciously thinking about what you're trying to spend it on.
Sure, sure. And what would you say then, if there was sort of, you said about the best time to start your pension is, and your first job, and if not, then it's now. Um, what are the other sort of key things that, that you would tell yourself maybe when you were sort of 20, whatever, entering the workplace? Like I know you say that, in an ideal world, you have the buffer, you have all this and everything set up. But what would be the key things that that you're always battling with people, that you would love to have everyone set up straight away, and then so many problems would be solved?
Yeah, so a couple that I touched on briefly. So one is just double check what your employer will match, because if you're putting in 3, they're putting in 3, they would put in 6. If you put in 6, your 3% gives you 6. It's a win-win. And that's before tax as well. I'd also say the auto enrollment, that's a really good step change in terms of people saving enough for retirement, is 8%. It's 3% employer, 4% employee, 1% tax break. 8%, broadly speaking, is probably not enough. So just look at what you're spending and going, don't think job done, tick, because you've got a pension. That's not necessarily going to cut it, particularly if you want to have a nice lifestyle, or you're used to more than a basic standard of living.
Okay, so that's the pension thing. Are there any other bits that you always come back to with people?
To be honest, a lot of it is the budgeting is like, hey, great, you've got some money. What are you doing with it? Are you setting it aside? If you don't need it for 5 years, you can think about investing. If you need it within the 5 years, you can't necessarily afford the ups and downs that you might have. And if you need to take the money out, you don't want to take it out at a loss. But getting into that habit and understanding that the volatility is inherent in financial markets, but that's not a bad thing. And it can be a good thing. If you put money in monthly, when markets are down, your contribution that month is worth more. So don't be scared. The sort of Warren Buffett said, when others are greedy, be fearful. When others are fearful, be greedy, which is kind of like saying when markets fall, that doesn't mean you should get out. That doesn't mean you should stop putting in. That's a good time to carry on or to invest. So I'd say that as well.
I think that's,
Consistency wins out, I think, as well.
yeah, it feels like a mindset, doesn't it? I think if you look at the markets from the outside and you're not used to it, then it's sort of
Yeah.
it's all complicated. It's all up and down, and this is my money. But I guess if you take the long term, that's what you're saying. Over the long term, consistency will get you there in the end.
And I mean, obviously, shameless plug that I do try and post about breaking down these concepts on LinkedIn so that it's sort of less scary, not just for clients, just for anyone who's trying to work out what it actually all means. I'm always happy to try and increase financial transparency in education because it's important.
No, definitely, definitely. And I think, yeah, because you've said about your numbers brain, obviously most lawyers, I think, would admit they don't have a numbers brain, and I definitely fall into that category as well. I can do it, but it's really hard for me. Because you can see it from both sides, is there any sort of takeaways that you think are the key things that lawyers could put into almost into their day jobs, not even maybe into their personal finances, but into their day jobs that would help them sort of on the numbers if they were a bit happier to deal with them?
Yeah. What I would say is the feedback I've got from everyone is it feels incredibly scary and challenging, but once you get into it and you go, okay, look, I can do this. It's going to be hard. It's not what I do for my day job, but actually it's not that scary. And a lot of lawyers, depending on what department you're in, you do some billing, you do some invoicing. It's not that much harder than that. I mean, funnily enough, I knew I needed to leave the law when I knew that was the bit that I enjoyed the most was the invoice.
Oh, the billing.
Billing bit. So I know that's not the case for a lot of people, but it's not that hard to have a little bit of discipline and go, okay, what am I spending? What am I trying to do? What does that look like for me? What do I need? What can I afford to save? What won't I miss? Thinking about the things that you need to do to protect yourself. Final crusade. People take out really cheap insurance because it's cheap. The more expensive it is, the more likely you are to claim on it and to need it. So it's kind of counterintuitive to go, I'm only going to take out cheap insurance or I'm only going to do things that don't cost a lot of money. So it's just, yeah.
So that would be in relation to like your life insurance and all that medical cover and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly that. So life insurance is the cheapest because it's the least likely to happen, but getting a critical illness, something like cancer, is more likely to happen. So covering yourself for that is going to cost you more. It's just basic maths, but it's not really that intuitive if you haven't really had that conversation with someone before.
Yeah. No,
And your
that makes
mortgage broker,
sense.
whenever you take out a mortgage, your mortgage broker is going to want to talk to you about this, and it's a really good thing to do at the same time and just sort of cover it off and give you that peace of mind.
No, definitely, because the income protection is a really key thing as well, that uh, some people do have that as a benefit, don't they, within their benefits
Yeah.
package? So that's major as well.
Yeah, so I've seen two different types of, you can get it for a limited period, say for 2 years, which is obviously better than nothing, or you get it through until you either you die, you get state pension age, or which is ideal because that's what you want. If something happens to you, you get hit by a bus. Also, it's mainly musculoskeletal where you claim, or mental health. So if you get chronic stress and you can't ever go back to work, you might be able to claim on that, or you could, depending on the policy. So it's really important just to get the building blocks right so that the longer term stuff isn't impacted if something happens as well.
Yeah. And again, I'd say I've definitely had people resistant to sort of getting that sort of insurance for themselves, that they rely on that from insurers. From employers. Have you had that same?
Yes. To be honest, a lot of the time when I speak to people and it's like, great, yeah, I've got the mortgage covered. I was like, okay, great. If the mortgage is paid off, like what happens? How do you live? And they're like, oh, but the mortgage is paid off. I was like, yeah, but you still don't have an income, or do you want your other half to have to carry on working and looking after your children? There's quite a lot more to it than just pick a number out the air and then that's covered. Or yeah, and if you got it through work, that's a really good thing. And if you've got it through work and that fits, then you don't necessarily need to take it out. It's just working out whether that fits
Yeah.
what your needs are, or they pick it as standard, or you have to, once a year on the My Benefits package, choose whether you take out this stuff. And you're like, I don't know, what do I need it? And it's like, well, having a little think about that can be really cost effective. And if you need it, then yeah, you would pay an unlimited amount of money to have it if you hadn't got it and you needed it.
Yeah, yeah, it's one of those. I mean, insurance is like gambling, isn't it? At the end of the day, you are taking a gamble on what may or may not happen, but the day you want it is the
Yeah,
day that you wished you'd paid sky high for it
exactly
previously.
that.
Yeah,
And the earlier you take it out, the cheaper it is, because
yeah,
there's further years of you paying premiums without them claiming. But also if you have a health condition or something happens, then you try and get insurance. That's going to be excluded. And you're not going to get cover for something you want. And the example I use, I posted about it recently, but one of my clients, he's the same age as me. He's 35. He got colon cancer,
oh wow,
and it was horrendous. We did have a policy in place for him, and I mean, he didn't have as much as I wanted him to have, or he thought he should have had in hindsight. But he got paid 60 grand, which just meant he should take some time off work
Mm.
and sort of look after himself and his fiance. So it's sort of you think it won't happen to you, but if it does,
Yeah, yeah.
you don't want to be the statistic of like, oh, I thought it was going to happen to me, and then it did. It's basically, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, that's the thing. And I was just thinking in terms of percentages, you said about the pay rise and keeping half of it and that kind of thing. I know I've read something, but I can't remember what the percentages were on your sort of your income, like you've said, your actual net income for the month. What percentage should you use on what? How much of that would you suggest that you live off, put away?
Yeah, so I can't. There was a podcast I listened to recently, and I can't for the life of me remember what it was, but they did have these numbers, which I've never looked at personally because
Okay.
I've always looked at it sort of on a bespoke basis for clients. I don't have a pithy number out there that I can just shout of like
Uh,
use this. But I think it was along the lines of I want to say spend 50, 30 for yourself and save 20. I think.
yeah, yeah.
So it's
I think
50% on
that's
bills and mortgage and food, and then 30% on that holiday's discretionary stuff, and then 20% saving, whether it's
yeah,
pensions or otherwise. I
yeah.
think.
No, I'd heard something similar, and I'd heard it actually through my teenage children who are at school, and they were starting to get some financial lessons at school. So that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean they're really good guys. Obviously, if you live in London and your mortgage is 80% of your salary, that's not going to be very helpful. But also, if that's the case, then maybe you need to think about whether that is sustainable for you anyway.
Yeah, yeah. No, fair enough, fair enough. Excellent. Yeah, I mean, future planning, anything else you could say on sort of future planning then? What are the top things that you need to think about for future planning?
Yeah, what I would say is don't try and leave it too late. The more that you do earlier, even if it doesn't seem like a lot, it will make a massive difference. Again, Einstein, he said with the compounding returns, I'm going to get this right. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it. And it's basically saying if you put £100 a month in your 20s, it's worth two, three, £400 in your 30s, 40s, 50s. Don't quote me on those exact numbers, but it
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
to make up that time, not just with the missed contributions, but also the growth on that.
Mm,
It's enormous. So it's simple, but doing the basics right will get you a very, very long way. And then
mm,
yeah, just think about how much risk you're taking in your portfolio.
mm,
Because
mm.
if you have a really risk averse fund, you might not even be beating inflation, which over 40, 50 years will have a massive negative impact on what your ultimate retirement or financial independence can look like.
No, fair enough, fair enough. Excellent. Well, I just wondered if anyone had any questions. Like I had said at the start, but not everyone was there. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat box and I can ask them because John is a wealth of knowledge here, just waiting to have his brain picked. So if there's anything specific that you have, then do let us know and put it in the chat box. Um,
Yeah.
but
Also,
yeah,
if you are thinking of going self-employed, I've put a little checklist together for things to think about. So feel free to message me. I'll be happy to share that.
yeah,
Oh.
yeah. So because the key things, I was just thinking as well with the self-employed limited companies and all that kind of thing, the key things that can come out before you have to worry about tax then. It is the pension, isn't it, is the key one, childcare.
Yeah, so the childcare, that the rates that you pay, but you can manage that within a limited company. So that's one of the benefits. You don't have to take the money out. You can build up a buffer. Whereas if you're a sole trader, you don't have a limited company and you're self-employed, when you earn money, you automatically get it. And once you get paid it, there's no way of avoiding things except through pension contributions. So you can manage it a lot better if you go through a limited company, which is
Okay.
helpful. But yeah, the tax is paid in arrears. You don't have to make pension contributions your first year. One of the things I would say, I've said this to someone before, which they found quite helpful, is if you think that you're on the cusp of being able to afford to make further contributions, you can always try putting that money aside, but in a pension reserve fund, for example. Well, it doesn't have to call it that, but that like I'm going to save it for that. And then if you feel like you can afford it at the end before the tax year, then you put it in, or you use it as a buffer for the next year and you start it then. So yeah, start it as early as possible for the future returns and benefit that you potential returns and benefits you'll get. But you don't have to do it. Don't do it at the expense of affording your life right now. Don't get into
Sure.
debt to do it. Well,
Yeah. That's the balance, isn't it? I was reading something about if you're not in debt, then you're ahead of however many ridiculous percent of everybody already, if you know what I mean. I guess I don't know if
yeah.
mortgages is included in that, but you know.
Yeah, sometimes I think like mortgages is almost like a good debt because it's fundamental to buying a house, and the depreciation of inflation works in your favor when you have a mortgage because the ultimate total value is still the same, but in real terms is less because of inflation, right? But yeah, like other debts, if it's impacting on your ability month to month, that is something that a lot of people find themselves in. Not
Yeah.
that many people have the 3 to 6 months that I would encourage them to have because they don't like it sitting there, particularly with inflation running rampant. And they're like, oh, but it's losing money. But it's like, yes, but you have to have it. So just ignore that and accept it and have it anyway, please.
So that's that would be your top tips. I'm hearing it's the sort of the understand your outgoings, get your pension sorted, and get a buffer in place.
And yeah, personal insurance.
And personal insurance. Okay. Yeah. No, just
Those from
that.
that. Yeah, it's fine.
Fabulous. No, well, that's great. There's no questions that have come into the chat, so I can only hope that it's all been useful for everyone
Because
in
I've answered everything.
attendance.
It's
But
perfect. It's fine.
that's what it is. That's what it is. But I know you do, like you say, you always put a lot up on LinkedIn, breaking down things and giving examples, which I think are really helpful, like the worked through examples to see the actual numbers. Because that's what brings it to life, isn't it? So
Yeah, and I've been given feedback that although lawyers like words, some more graphs as well would be useful. So I'm working on that just so that
oh,
people can
okay.
get
No,
that
that's
sense of it as
fab.
well.
That's
But yeah, if
fab.
anyone ever thinks, oh, I don't understand something, feel free to drop me a message because posting an idea is always appreciated, to be honest. So, and if I don't get feedback, I don't know if something's not making sense. So don't be shy.
Sure. No, that's excellent. And so, like you say, having been a lawyer as well, you do understand the world and how it works, which I think, it is quite unique, although everyone gets paid at the end of the month, but there's still uniqueness, especially when it's around, you know, uh, how things are funded or if you get into partnership and that sort of thing. Oh,
Yes,
can,
exactly that.
someone's just asking if you could share your email address and contact details. If you could maybe put that in the chat box for them, that would
Yeah,
be
I'm also going to put
fabulous.
that article I mentioned about the 30-hour free childcare and that the tax trap above the 100, just so that people have that for
Yeah, that would be
information.
great. That would be great.
Like that's not spelled right. That's
It's
my email address.
fabulous. No, that's great. And you're on LinkedIn as well, aren't you? So that you're easy to find on LinkedIn and follow and that sort of thing. So
I am. If you give me 10 seconds, it's in my footer for my email, so I will put a copy in there as well.
brilliant.
That
That's
should work.
great.
No, thanks for having
No,
me on, Clara. It's been really
yeah,
enjoyable.
that's
And
great.
also
No, it's
anyone
good
that's
to have
not
you.
following Clara, you put some great stuff out there as well. So sharing the love back.
Well, it works well, I think, say with the career side, obviously it is a massive decision, moving jobs or taking any career steps, and finances is really important to do that alongside. It's a massive consideration. So yeah, it's thinking it all through. It does work together.
Yeah, I think it's just sometimes getting a sense check and going, what am I doing? Am I doing the right things? There's something I'm missing. Sometimes there's not, then you get that peace of mind. And sometimes, yeah, there is. And then it's good to have asked.
Yeah. Say is everyone's always nervous about doing something new and different, aren't they? So
Yeah.
even if, like you say, it's reassurance that no, you've covered all the bases, you've ticked all the boxes, you're good.
Yeah, and I think the final thing I'll say is that sometimes staying put feels like the safe option, but it's not necessarily safe. It might be in the short run, but actually longer term, it might be not the right thing for you. And having left the law, changed career, then gone so I left my employed financial advice role. I'm now self-employed. I can say each time they feel really big and scary and risky, but I'm glad I did each step. So sometimes
Mm.
you know when it's right, but it talking through with someone and going, am I making well, these are the reasons I'm thinking about it. What do you think is useful to get some outside perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Would say yes, which is exactly what I do when people are speaking about their jobs as well. It's that, someone to talk about it with so that don't don't just get stuck in your own head and do nothing, because that's the easiest path of least resistance sort of thing.
Yeah, and I always caution about talking too closely to family because they want the best for you, but also they've got a certain viewpoint and sometimes a vested interest in something that might not be in your best interests. My dad, it was I hope he doesn't listen to this, but basically it is quite a prestigious thing to be a lawyer. So like, the coffees in the village, it's a really good thing, whereas it's not so much for what I do now or when I was on paternity leave. So yeah, an outside impartial perspective is always really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's great. We'll say thanks for coming online and having a chat and sharing your knowledge. And yeah, we're both on LinkedIn if anyone needs us. So it's great to have everyone here.
Yeah, thanks for attending. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye bye.